All right, guys, we're going to talk about prepping up uh, a rough layout here to do a character turnaround. And so there's a couple key things that I want to mention to you because I already had someone come up to me and a couple other students had already asked me like, hey, I want to start doing this and I have my character where I'm looking down on him and I want to turn him that way. Nah, that's not going to work. There's sort of a basic principle that you need to think about when you're doing a character turn, okay? Part of doing a character turn, it's not always going to be in your benefit. Okay, it's not going to be the pose or the direction that you want, and that's fine. That's not what it's for. The purpose of you doing a really nice, solid turnaround study is going to be for you to match up the right distances and proportions of your character at a correct perspective. That is really key here. Okay, so I'm going to grab a couple of these images and we'll start to trace over them a little bit, and I might give you a couple little options that you can do. Okay. Wow, that one didn't transfer. Hold on a minute here. Let's see what's happening here. Okay, hold on. I got a major lapse here. Okay, sorry about that delay, guys. I was moving something and it eats up a lot of the computer memory when I drag and drop. So if you look up at the blog, I put up a bunch of great examples of what to do and what not to do. And when you look at some of these examples, you're going to see a lot of drawing through the shape, and that's really, really important, is that we're having a good understanding of the position of the shapes and how they're turning. Okay, now one thing that I'm going to point out to you that you have to have inside your turnaround is a placement of a horizon line. It's mandatory, and there's usually tends to be a place where that horizon line is going to take place. In the majority of turnarounds, you're either going to see the horizon line right in the midsection of the character. Okay. Every now and then, depending on if it's a dog or a human, okay, you might have to variate that. So if we have a human, we're going to tend to have that drawing right in the middle, excuse me, the horizon line right in the middle of the drawing. And then sometimes with an animal, since they're a little, especially a quadruped animal, since they're a little bit smaller, we might get the illusion that we are sort of looking down on top of them, but the horizon line isn't really here. The horizon line is intersecting the middle of the chest, okay? What we don't want to do is raise the horizon line up super high to where we change the vantage point or the perspective view, or an opposite, we don't want to have the horizon line down super, super duper low. Now, I worked with a guy who would always draw it down about ankle height or knee height and work from there. That can be okay and you can get away with it, but then you're going to be looking up really extreme underneath part of the face, okay? But then you would try to draw the character's head tilting down. So it's just really safe if you sort of have it in the middle, and there's a reason for that. It might not be the best angle for the drawing that you're doing. Your goal in a character turnaround is not to have really expressive drawings. It's not. That's what an expression sheet's for. Your goal in your character turnaround is to provide me, the 3D modeler, with enough information that I might need, or the 3D animator with an idea on how the shape and form are turning and what is happening to areas of difficulty or parts of the anatomy when that turns. For example, how arms insert to each other, where I find center lines. If you have a character that's really a heavy body shape or overweight, right? That body shape might work for one particular view, but then when you have to draw that character from another view and there's a curve in the back, if the character doesn't line up with the other views, it's not going to work and it's not going to be animatable, number one. And number two, it's not going to transfer to an image. So what I'm going to do really quick in this demo is I put up all this reference for you, and I talked about what not to do. And this was a sample of what not to do. I just grabbed this from online. And the thing that's, the principles here are correct in terms of you have a line here and the character's height is staying on top of that line. And then you have sort of like a nose line. And this is where the character starts to falter a little bit as you start to have some issues here with the teeth being in the side view, the angle of the teeth when the character is turning. That if this ball shape of the head right here is consistent when it turns, why is there such an immediate increase in the shape of the mouth that comes up above? That should stay pretty consistent as we turn part of our character around. Okay, so if you get confused on any of this, just check the blog, I put some really great examples from Balto. I mentioned that a little bit earlier. Balto had some really top-notch animators and designers that had actually worked back at Disney back in the day. And when they worked on this project, my buddy Joe Weatherly came in there and instructed a lot of them on animal anatomy and shape and construction. So a lot of his knowledge went into some of these drawings too. And he was really good at getting them to understand the construction and the shapes. And what's really important, that the first thing we're doing in our character designs, okay, in our turnarounds, is that we are working and focusing, I'm going to say working, okay, work and focusing on shape and how shape relates and how it overlaps each other and how it's constructed. And here's a really good example. When you see this, this main character Steel here, you see the face coming towards you, turning to the side and going all the way to the side view. Okay, that's a really great example. We're not doing what's down here. Okay, so if someone comes in on Tuesday with a sketch and I see a whole bunch of detail on it, I'm going to jump on you. Okay, because that's not what we're doing. We're not going for the detail right now. We're trying to get the shape to match up. We're trying to draw through the shape. Okay, in that process of drawing through the shape, some of you guys are not going to succeed because there's a couple basics that you're not going to do right. And I'm going to go over some of those basics with you right now. I'm going to do some draw overs on some of these character turnarounds and try to explain to you why these are really good examples of a turnaround and what's happening. Okay, so I have my blue here. I'm on another layer. Just double check that. Okay, perfect. So first thing here, okay, is that let's establish a general look and feel for where we have like a base horizon line, okay? And I could pretty much, looking at this, I can determine that my horizon line's right about here in sort of that midsection of the character, which is a great place to have it. And the reason for that is that it allows me to see the feet in a good angle, and I can see on top of the feet so I can tell what the shoe is, okay? And then I could look up at the character and have a good idea of the hat and the other shapes. But let's take a look at some of the shapes that are indicating that the horizon line is right there. Number one, look at his jacket. His jacket is in an elliptical shape here. Let me darken this just a little bit. Okay, do you see that? He has an ellipse, and we're looking underneath part of that ellipse right now. Okay, oops. I don't know how that happened. Okay, so look at this ellipse here, turn. Okay, do you see that? Look at under part of that structure right there. Okay, and then we look down here, we're looking down on these ellipses. We're looking down on those. Okay, so back to that old theory and perspective about the old analogy or metaphor of having a quarter. If I take that quarter and if I raise that quarter above my horizon line, I'm going to see that much of the ellipse. And then if I keep going and if I raise that up a little bit more, I'm going to start to see a little bit more, and then a little bit more, and then, hold on a minute, I lost my sketchiness of my pen. And then if I drop down, I can't talk today. I'm going to see a little bit more, and that ellipse is going to start to gradually get a little wider. So that's really important for me to think about. Okay, so step number one, get a dedicated horizon line in there. A lot of students that come back with the drawing and they show it to me, they're like, oh look, here's my sketch. I could already tell there's no horizon because there's perspective angles that are thrown off on the character. Okay, step number two, that's going to be persistent. This is a principle you should have been taught in figure drawing. Okay, is that if you go find the center of the character's nose, pretty much, okay, or face, I should say. If you come in here and if you draw a line from the feet that cross each other, that are in the middle of the feet, you find the center point and you draw a line straight up, you're going to hit the nose and the face like that. Okay, so now at a turn angle, if I come back here, I have the back of the feet, front of the feet. If I go to the middle right here, the middle distance between those, and if I draw a straight line up, okay, these shapes down here that are existing, they're overlapping in terms of the weight and the balance. Does that make sense? I've talked about this when you do gesture drawing, about the movement of the shoulders in relationship to the legs, okay? All right, whenever I start to move my body around, I have like if I were to hang a piece of yarn from my chin, that's what I call like my center line and my mass that controls part of my weight distribution. Okay, so what tends to happen, what throws us off balance as people and makes us fall, is when we take our shoulders. I learned this in wrestling, by the way. And we take the shoulders, not WWF, high school wrestling, right? Okay. I used to have a coach that used to say, if you want to get your opponent down, push him a little bit and then shoot in and grab his legs. Because if you push him up here, right, it causes the shoulders to leave the center mass. So the center of my shoulders, which is this little dot right here on Goofy, okay, that center right there, once that leaves the center of where the legs are, you become off balance, and that's how somebody falls. All the time when people do character designs, you start to turn the character, and they start to lean the character too forward, or they start to pull them back too much, and when that happens, you can tell that they're off balance and they're crooked. So one of the things you want to look for when you're starting to sketch your character is make sure that center line is always sort of being represented. Okay, so if I come into any of these drawings right now, and I look at the distance between the feet, the front of the feet, the back, I find the middle, and if I come up and I draw a line straight up, okay, let me see if I can, let me do this in red really quick. So if you look at the shape of where the feet are, and see how they're landing, and you find that little midsection, and then if we come up here to the face, and if we take a look at the face in sort of the same way, how his face is going down a little bit, but if we do this, and we find that box that his face is constructed in right there, okay, like that, you're going to see from the center mark right down here, okay, they're pretty close to being identical. Do you see that? They're hitting there and hitting about right there. Okay, if you get too crooked, it can throw off your character a little bit. Try to keep that center line in there that's active. And if you want to, too, you can also sort of, sometimes when I'm doing a character study, I come in, and when I'm having to do a turnaround, I'm thinking about this dotted line like this. How that dotted line is wrapping down, coming over the body, going over the character, dropping down, and then hitting the ground and ending up in the sort of the same place. Okay, so that's one thing, is you want to try to get your character to be, you know, even though you might have him posed and he's like this, he's like, hey, and he's like Mr. Crazy Man or something, right? And his arms are up. That's not what we want to do when we get down to our turnaround, because a modeler or an animator, they're not going to look at this. They want to see what the character looks like in the shape and form. And again, the reason why we do this is that there are some characters that are easy to turn, but once you get characters that are heavy, or you get characters with like exaggerated bellies or necks or heads, it's a whole different world when you start drawing them from a different 3/4 angle. Okay, so this is, you know, what's going to help you out here. Okay, remembering a couple of these basics here. Let's take a look at, you know what, I grabbed that guy and I didn't mean to grab this guy. So let's take a look at this right here. Okay, this is just an excellent example of what you guys want to try to do in terms of the shape that you're going to be using. Okay, now the horizon line on this character is really about sort of in the middle. It's about right, it's a little bit above the middle, about right there, because I can see down a little bit on top of that. And that's okay, because you tend to notice that, like I said, on quadrupeds, okay? On animals, because we're looking down on them, so the horizon line goes up a little bit. If we come back, hold on a minute. I thought I had another sketch here. I must have deleted it by accident. Give me a second here. Let me grab it again. 1 second. 1 minute here. Let me back up there. So I wanted to show you this example right here. There we go. There we go. Grabbed it, drag it, put it in there. Let's bring that into our drawing real quick so I have. Oops. Get a little bit too big. There we go. So the reason why I wanted to show this to you really quick is for this, is because if we come in here, this is Pocahontas, right? Basically, who they stole the movie Avatar from. Okay. So if we look down on here and you look, you can see on top of her feet like this. Do you see that? Okay, there's a distinct reason for that. That way, if we draw it right at the feet line, then we're looking up at the whole entire character, and it throws it off a little bit. So if you look for a good placement of that horizon line, you're going to start to notice it's somewhere pretty much about the waist. It's going to be right about in there. Okay. That way, when we're looking up a little bit, now they might cheat a little bit, and you might not see exactly under her chin, but it might be part of the pose. Okay. But when you're looking at part of this figure, actually, her line's about right there. Okay, a little bit higher. That works for her character because look at her construction. Look at her upper body and then her lower body. Her lower body is really stretched and distorted, and that would sort of make sense. But the reason why I'm going through this with you guys is it's quite often when you see people that do a turnaround, they're not thinking about a horizon line, number one. They're not thinking about how the character's feet are anchoring down to a ground plane. Okay, so that's sort of that next phase is that when I look at the feet, that's one of the things that indicate whether or not an artist is doing part of that sketch correctly. Okay, if I were to come over here and map out part of the perspective, let me see if I can get this very lightly in here. You have to think of your character as being on a realistic ground plane in perspective like this. This is really going to help you figure out how some of the shapes are working here. So I plotted just a real quick vanishing point, and I'm just coming from a couple of these, nothing fancy, right? Just going to draw a couple lines down here. But the reason why this is important is some of you guys, mark my word, you'll turn in a character design, and I'm going to be able to look at it, and I'm going to tell that the character is not on a correct ground plane. And that's really, really imperative. Okay, so if you don't know how to draw a grid, but you should have learned that in basic drawing, okay, I just drew a base grid there, and here's how you can tell. It's not just drawing a straight line, but it's making sure, again, looking at the relationship, that center line from the shoulders, following that down to the feet. So if you look at the shoulders right in here and we draw a straight line, we bring that, let me see if I can do that in red. So if we come over here and we look at the position of the shoulders, we draw that line down and we come down and we see where the feet end. So basically the feet are turning and the shoulders are in another direction. That's a more complicated turnaround because the character is, I don't want to say contrapposta, but their shoulders are turned one way and their feet are turned the other. That's totally fine. Here, the shoulders are turned that way. We draw a line straight down. Oops. Right there, we're going to hit there. Look at where the feet are. Okay? So that's really important. Now, coming from a modeling background, that's the type of information that I always wanted, was something that was very detailed. And a lot of times what I would get from people on a turnaround is that, number one, they never had a horizon line, and there was a massive problem of positioning the center line in the figure. They would draw the character as if they were in an expression sheet. I don't want that. I want the character standing like this, just sort of simple and plain. We'll do expression sheets after this. Okay, you get to pick one of your characters and we'll do some expressions. Expression sheets are great. That's where you get to really chase the pose and the action of the character and the personality. This phase of the drawing is not about personality, right? It's not about all that. This is about perspective, the construction, and rotating shape. And then all that communicates a big equal sign to displaying the right information for somebody to either draw it or to build it in Maya. Christina, you have a question?
Can I ask about light?
Yeah.
Is this too complex or should I just straighten?
You can go for that. I mean, you have some complex shapes, but what happens is this is where you might see if your character is working or not, is when you start to turn that character and you draw them in a front view, and then you already have them in a 3/4, right? But you get them in a front view, and then you get them in a side view, you might start to notice problems with how the arms might work, or how they might animate correctly, or how the character might walk. Okay, that happens all the time, is that you start drawing the character and you realize, like, oh my God, the legs are this big, how are they really going to walk? You know, and that's where you might have to go talk to an animator and figure out what are the solutions that we have. Maybe they do this little like thing like this, you know, where they sort of wobble along very quickly. But there are points in there where you have to figure stuff out to make it work. Because what will happen is if you're on a show and you have a character that has really limited arms or legs, and then you get a script and it's saying that the character is reaching up and scratching their head, and you're like, wait a minute, my guy's got small arms. How does he scratch his head? He can't even wipe his butt. How would he scratch his head, right? Well, you got to sort of incorporate that into your design, and you got to figure out. And that's where you might make changes in your design. Is you might come in and bring a shape in or make it smaller and redraw it from another side and get it to work. Okay. Anyway, I just wanted to show these because, you know, this isn't what we're talking about here. They're just straight, good, solid draftsmanship principles that you all should have been taught or learned, you know, with using horizon lines and boxes and cubes and all that good stuff. Okay. All right. Let me go back in here. So let's take a look at hold on a minute. Got a couple of different drawings there. Just add that one up. go back into this right here. Okay, so looking at this, one thing that I want you to do is that there's a gimme that a lot of you guys already know, which is, you know, hey Phil, I can do a character turnaround because I could just come in here and just draw all the lines going across and I can press shift. Well, yeah, that's the beginning phase of it, okay? But you have to understand it's not just the lines in there, but you also have to think about the change of shape. So yes, these lines are really imperative, okay? Because once I draw these trace lines going across, and I take a look at, let me drop the opacity down on this a little bit more. So we see the trace lines up on the top there, okay? Yeah, these lines have to be straight. They have to be done with a ruler, okay? But what's important about those lines is you can see where the chest exists. So since the character is foreshortened in this particular view, part of that chest shape might come up a little bit over that line. That's just because that shape is being foreshortened, and that cylinder shape is basically that shape right in there. But then once I start to turn it a little bit, sorry, I can't draw today, and I start to take a look at what I have here, this is why I don't like drawing with a Cintiq sometimes. Can't get the shapes that I like. You can see that shape turning. So one of the things I want you to start doing is I don't want you to go in and start drawing the whole character. I want you to start with the prime mass shapes of that character. And the best, in my opinion, one of the best things to do is you don't start with the head, you don't start with the feet. You start with the one part of the body that if you shake it, everything else moves, which is the center mass, the chest. You start with the chest and you start to turn those shapes, okay? The arms are external, what we call like flanges, right? Little arms that are going to shake and move, right? That can change. If I can't get the chest to be in the right position, the head won't be in the right position. And those of you that know anything about figure drawing, the chest controls the shoulders, and then the chest connects down to the pelvic bone, right? And that's going to control the hips. So that's how we get contrapposto. So if you have a character that's changing, the first thing we want to do is really figure out how the body mass is turning. Okay, so first thing, figure out a horizon line. When we look in here, we can pretty much have a good idea of the turn of that shape that our horizon line's, sorry, that's Photoshop doing that. Our horizon line's right about right there, okay? Because when this shape is turning here, I can't quite see underneath it. I can't quite see on top of it. And when I look at it, especially in a side view, basically my cylinder shape is doing this. Okay? So that's my core shape that's in there. Okay, so look at that center mass and see how it's turning. Look at this now when it turns away from us. That's the rear, it's smaller. It's funny, I was trying to sketch in my sketchbook earlier today, and I stayed up till like 2 in the morning baking my sculpture in the oven. And I feel that in my drawings. I'm not as fluid today, so bear with me. And then even here, you can't really see it, but in the front there, that's totally foreshortened. That's the front, that's the rear. Okay, so before I even start diving into all the character goodness, look at what I have there, folks. I have the rotation and shape happening. That's the underlining structure to what I have. Okay, if it helps you to think with the center line in it, that's totally fine. Okay, but that's what you have to get down. You have to get that feel for shape. And what most artists tend to do when they do a turnaround is they start thinking about the details of the character and the exterior line, and they're not thinking about the shape and how the shape is turning. Okay, and that's what's going to make a good turnaround from a bad turnaround. Okay, now the next thing that I would recommend, this is sort of Phil's method, is I like thinking about how things insert with each other. Okay, so if I was doing this on this dog right here, and that was my character, what I would do next is I would come over here and I would look at part of my sphere that I have. Hold on, let me drop this opacity down just a little bit more. And come back a little bit more than that. There we go, about right there. And let me come back up to here. I'm going to erase this top one just a little bit here, because I didn't bring it far further enough. I wanted to bring it, it's going to actually, part of it's going to just overlap just a teeny bit right in there. Okay? Now, the reason I did that is because when I think about the legs, what I like to do is I need to think about the leg's going to hit here, and that leg is going to wrap in. Let me see if I can change colors here. That leg is going to wrap in here in red, and I need to think about where that intersects right there. You see how that shape is going to lean up against that cylinder? It's going to come up and it's going to interact. So if I draw a center line to that cylinder, it's going to come down to about there, and it's going to go up there. The reason why that's important for me is that if I draw through the shape right here, okay, and I need to figure that out on the other side to where he's turning, I know it's going to look something like this. Does that sort of make sense? I drew through the other shape, that if this is intersecting right here, this is going to intersect about right here. And this drawing is pause coming up, but if I were to bring that leg straight down, it's going to end up about right here. Okay? So that's really important. That's sort of the next step, is after you start to rotate some of the shapes, get in there and think about how the shapes are overlapped. Look at the top head structure here. This head is basically like a squashed cone. See that? With the center line right down the middle, like that. Okay? And that center line does come down the chest. Let me erase a little bit of that overlap that I had right in there. Hold on a minute. Let me get my eraser back. Brush. Eraser. Okay. So I'm going to erase a little bit of that underside there. You have to draw through the shape to figure out how your character is going to connect and hook up. Okay? On the back side. It's extremely important. So if I look at this leg here, this leg's in an angle, but look at where it's overlapping that shape right there. Okay? Right here, it's touching and connecting with that shape. All right? So then once I come back over here and I start to draw this leg coming down, it's basically just coming at an angle like this. And I know it arches back. If you have that, draw the shape. Draw the cylinder that's in there. And then it comes forward. And then where it hits the ground plane, the foot is like a sphere cut in half. Like this. If I were to enlarge the foot is this. It has a center line. It goes up and over, connects here. And then part of that leg is now connecting inside that foot and going upward like that. Does that make sense? Think about the shapes. Get the shapes drawn correctly in perspective. That's the most important part of what's going to happen in your turnaround. The other detail stuff comes later. Okay, and then what I'll do, so step number 1, right? We talked about establishing a horizon line. Okay, step number 2, let me see if I can turn this drawing back up here. We talked about establishing and figuring out the right distance of the shoulders in relationship to where the feet are hitting the ground. So even if I look at this guy, look at his shoulders here to here, I draw a center line down, bam, look, right in between both feet. If I come over here, take a look at the center line of the face and the head, it comes down, hits right in between the feet. If I come over here, between both shoulders, draw a line that's going to come down, it hits right there, which is in between the placement of both feet. Even the back, the rear view. Hips, find the middle of the hips, bring a line down, it hits. Okay? That's really important. That keeps our character straight and prevents them from being tilted and distorted. And once they start to offset those shoulders away from part of the ground plane line, it's going to feel sloppy and the construction isn't going to be there. Okay? All right, so that's it. I'm going to wrap up the demo right here. It's done. I won't be able to post this until tomorrow, so I'm going to tell it to render. And when I'm in here tomorrow, I'll post it back up. Okay, but it's pretty basic. This is just shapes, overlapping shapes. But you have to draw the shapes. I don't even come back and be like, look, I have a whole character and you have all the detail on the face and the hair. That's too much. Stick with the shapes, and most important, draw through the shapes. By having the horizon line, figuring out that relationship of the shoulders and where the feet hit the ground, understanding that the feet are on a grid plane, and then understanding how the shapes exist or turning in perspective and how they overlap each other is key. That's what's going to make your drawing feel right and feel structured and feel correct. Okay? All right. Thanks, guys.